Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Sovereignty over Judea and Samaria has been stalled. It's been stalled. It's on hold. We don't know what's happening, but we're going to try to find out what's happening. We have a lot of guests on the show today. We're going to be talking about that. Also, the recent left-wing demonstrations that are going on against the Prime Minister of Israel. They are converging on Jerusalem, making lots of noise. You don't want to be there. You do not want to be at these demonstrations. They're whistling. They're making loud honking horns. Terrible, terrible noise, demanding that the Prime Minister resign. That's the left wing doing that. And the Prime Minister says this is being led by Ehud Barak. He's the former Prime Minister from the left wing here in Israel, who, by the way, is... doesn't have such a clean and tidy past himself, but we won't talk about that. So what's going on there? He says it's a disgrace. There was even a Palestinian flag at these demonstrations. So what's going on? We're also going to be talking about another news show we have here on our lineup at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com called Israel Unplugged with our new host, Josh Wander. He's going to be coming on the show today to talk about his new show that's going to be airing live every week on Mondays. Monday, 9 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Israel time. He will be live. You can call into his show. You can talk with him. It's going to be very interesting. And last week, we had our debut show of another show concentrating on Aliyah, moving to Israel, which was called Returning Home with Natalie Sapinski. Folks, if you did not hear that show, go to our website right after this one and go and listen to the podcast on Returning Home with Natalie Sapinski. It was amazing. You got to hear that show called Returning Home with Natalie Sapinski. And she's also live, by the way, on Thursdays at the same time, 4 p.m. Israel time, 9 a.m. U.S. Eastern time on Thursdays. You can join Natalie there and call into her show. All right. Well, we are going to be talking about the stories of left-wing demonstrations here in Israel, why sovereignty is not being applied in Judea and Samaria, even though the Prime Minister made this promise to us. And again, about our new live show we're adding to our lineup. Don't go anywhere, everybody. We're going to be right back. And join me in the chat room. Sign in with your Facebook or Twitter or whatever.
G'day, I'm Jono Vandor.
And I'm Ross Nichols.
Join us on our program, Israel on My Mind, a show that broadcasts all the weekly goodness that flows like milk and honey from the Holy Land straight into your ears with humorous and happy news stories.
New shows are posted every Thursday at 7 p.m. Israel time, highlighting the lighter side and advancing a positive view of Israel here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Well, there was a very large protest in Jerusalem yesterday against the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, demanding that he resign. They can't get him out through the voting booth, and so now they're just trying to intimidate him into resigning. And what is behind these demonstrations? They're making lots of noise. You go out onto the streets. I mean, you can't sleep. I feel bad for all the people living in the city that the demonstration was going by, and all these babies that are waking up at night. Tremendous noise, and even Palestinian flags at this demonstration, which the Prime Minister says was a disgrace. Here to talk to us more about this, we have joining us as our guest, Dr. Mordechai Ben-Menachem. He is a researcher, former lecturer at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, and that's down south here in Israel. He's authored over 70 books and 400 research papers on science, history, and more. He commentates on Mideastern world issues. Welcome to the show, Dr. Mordechai Ben-Menachem.
Thank you.
All right, so we're seeing these left-wing noisy demonstrations. This is different. Usually whenever we see the left-wing demonstrations are usually held in Tel Aviv, in Rabin Square. It's a huge open plaza. And now they're converging on Jerusalem in front of the Prime Minister's residence, marching down the streets of Jerusalem, trying to get there. There's altercations with the police. They're making lots of noise, even a Palestinian flag waving there. What do you make of all of this?
Well, let me make my basic position very clear, first of all. We have a democracy. The right of people to demonstrate when they have an issue is clearly something which is to be respected. I encourage people to demonstrate if they feel that there's a need. However, on the one hand, we're talking about the democratic rights, and there's absolutely no question that there is a right to demonstrate. On the other hand, we're talking about a very large set of demonstrations. It's very unclear for now who is organizing them. It's very unclear for now who is funding them. If you ride in any buses, you see enormous advertisements against the government and against things that are going on. Somebody is funding this. The funders are not identified. There are no left-wing political parties anymore, so we can't say that these are political. They are not political. What we do know in absolute terms is that this is the number one matrix for spreading the virus. We know that whoever is organizing this is organizing a concerted effort to kill people in the country.
So why would people at the demonstration want to go and kill themselves or get themselves sick?
Well, I don't think that that's what I'm saying. I don't think I'm saying that people want to get themselves sick. I think people are influenced by various things, and part of this influence is causing a lot of these people to do things that they do. Again, some of the people that are demonstrating have valid reasons, as I said before. There's no issue about that. For instance, the independent small businessmen, they have valid issues. This is not an easy time that they're having. A lot of people are having very, very difficult times, and it's legitimate to express your opinion in a democracy. Thank God we finally have our own democracy where we can express our own opinions to our own politicians. This is fantastic. However, again, I believe that this is a small minority of the people. It's very clear for anybody who looks at any photographs that the numbers reported by the media are absolute lies. They are totally disconnected from reality.
And what are those numbers?
We heard last night, for instance, that in front of the Prime Minister's residence, there are 1,500 people. That's physically impossible.
That's no less than how many? Sorry,
1,500 demonstrators.
1,500 people.
Yeah, there's just no physical way that can be. There just isn't space there. We heard about tens of thousands of people in Rabin Square. You cannot have tens of thousands of people in Rabin Square. The absolute maximum capacity, if you're talking about people being very close to one another, really, really packed in, is 20,000 people in Rabin Square. That's a known number. So either these people were packed in like sardines without oil, or the media is simply lying. They're not reporting real numbers. They're reporting what they would like people to know. So how many people are actually demonstrating, and how many of these demonstrators are professional demonstrators? We do not know. Who is organizing this? Who is funding this? Who is paying for all those very, very expensive paid advertisements on buses? We don't know. Who is where is this funding coming from? Is it coming from inside the country or outside the country? Are these agents provocateurs, which we have known many, many times in the past, particularly from the European Union? We do not know. And I'm saying that what we need more than anything else right now is to know. We need people to actually go out and do the work and find out what really is going on here. Who is organizing this? Is their objective really to cause the spread of disease throughout the country? Because that's what they're doing.
According to a news report on IsraelNationalNews.com and Arutz Sheva, Prime Minister Netanyahu, it says here, he criticizes left-wing protesters for waving Palestinian Authority flags outside his official residence. The Prime Minister strongly criticized left-wing demonstrators who waved this flag during the protests outside his official. Okay, that was the headline. The Palestinian Authority flag at a left-wing demonstration organized by Ehud Barak. What a shame and a disgrace, Netanyahu tweeted following the demonstration. So he's saying that this was by Ehud Barak, who was the former Prime Minister of Israel, former IDF Chief of Staff. And we know that he has a bit of a tainted past himself, but he's back in politics now after he lost the prime ministership. What do you have to say about that?
Well, Ehud Barak has an amazing record. If you go down through the years of what he has accomplished, he has one of the most amazing records in the history of the country. He has he was a tremendous success until he was the level of company commander, and he has failed in every single job he's had since then. He was the worst prime minister in history. He was the shortest prime minister in history. He was the worst minister of defense in our history. He was the worst chief of staff in history. While Ashkenazi is a close second on that last bit, Ehud Barak has an exemplary record of failing in everything that he does. Is he back in politics today? I really doubt it. I think he's probably being used more as a tool and a name than actually doing anything. The man is incompetent. He's always been incompetent. Everything he's done throughout his life, he's been incompetent. He's a total failure in everything he does. Is he capable of organizing demonstrations like this and finding the funding for it? I seriously doubt it.
Well, for somebody who's a failure, he became the chief of staff. He became the prime minister of Israel. I mean, that doesn't seem to me like a failure in everything that he does.
It's not a question, if you hire people for a job, it's not sufficient to say, oh, here's a check mark. You did this job, and you did this job, and you did this job. You have to ask, did they succeed in those jobs?
Did they do it well? You're saying, did they do the job well?
Were they a success?
Okay.
So Ehud Barak became the chief of staff for political reasons, and everybody knew it at the time.
All right. So we only have another minute left. I want to ask you, where do you think this is going to go? Do we have to be wary of what's going on here? Do you think it's going to turn into like what we're seeing in the United States? There were some scuffles with police.
No.
So where do you think it's going?
We're seeing something which is clearly organized. I'm estimating that it's organized from external to the country. They will make some noise, as you said. They will try to do something, but they really can't do anything because the difference between Netanyahu and anybody else who might be protested against is that Netanyahu really is popular. He really is desired by the vast majority of the country. He has flaws like anybody else, like any other human being. But let me just give you one number to give you an idea what the accomplishment of Netanyahu is.
Okay, you have to do it quickly because we're almost off the air. Go.
Right. When he became prime minister, the state of Israel had $10 billion in reserves in the Bank of Israel. We now have $125 billion. No country in the world has that sort of record. No leader in the world has that sort of record. And that's only one aspect of many.
Wow. So he kind of like what you're saying, he made Israel great again financially.
Absolutely. We have today one of the largest sovereign funds in the world of any non-OPEC country.
Fascinating. Well, that is a piece of good news. I'm happy I did this show just to hear that. All right. Dr. Mordechai Ben-Menachem, thank you very much for being with us and giving us an update of what's going on. I appreciate it. And God bless you and stay safe.
Thank you very much.
All right. When we get back, everybody, we're going to be talking about something else that is going on in the government, or something that's not going on in the government, I should say. And that is that the Prime Minister, who did make a promise about applying sovereignty in Judea and Samaria, well, that's been stalled. The question is why? And we're going to find out. Our next guest is going to be joining us is Dr. Martin Sherman, and he has a lot to say on the subject. By the way, this is a live show. If you'd like to call in and ask the questions, you can do so. Our numbers are on the top of our homepage at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. We'll be right back.
Hi, everyone. This is Andrea Siminto from Jerusalem, inviting you to drop everything and join me on my show, Pull Up a Chair. We'll visit this week's quirky stories, meet fabulous guests, and discover my Israel. Together, we'll laugh, shout, and explain the topics that make us say, hey, we've got to talk about that. So get comfortable and pull up a chair with me, Andrea Siminto, every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
And me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, we are back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. And the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, promised his voters and promised the nation of Israel that he was going to apply sovereignty to Judea and Samaria, or to, at least to the Jewish places in Judea and Samaria. And that, sadly, has been put on hold. Not surprisingly, because a lot of us were skeptical, but and we thought if he did it, it would be a pleasant surprise. However, you know, politicians make lots of promises, and most often they don't always come true. But we're going to be taking a look at this right now. Our guest is Dr. Martin Sherman. He is the founder and director of the Israeli Institute for Strategic Studies. He is also a columnist and is published on several news media websites around the world. You can find him at martinsherman.org or at strategic-israel.org. Welcome to the show, Dr. Martin Sherman.
Thank you for the invitation.
All right. So the Prime Minister made a promise. Again, unfortunately, we don't see it materializing. Tell us what's happening.
Well, I think that's the $64,000 question. Of course, you know, the coronavirus pandemic has muddied the waters and given everyone an excuse to hang on to. But I think in many ways, the pandemic would have been a good cover under which to implement the annexation, because with people distracted, it might have been a good time to make the move. I find this reticence very puzzling. I don't think that it's going to become easier and easier to implement the annexation. And I think the annexation, or extending of sovereignty, for the linguistic purists, I think is an urgent imperative for Israel, and so I find this very very puzzling.
Well, why do you say it's imperative that he do it? I mean, we're living here right now without it. People are going to the dentist. They're going to the malls. Well, maybe not now. They're going to maybe have a second closure. But people are going about their life. Why? Why is it imperative then?
Well, you know, things are never really at a static status quo. Things keep moving, and I don't think anyone would have thought, say, a few decades ago, that you would have had an armed Palestinian militia deployed near to the nation's capital, and that's what you have today. I think that we have to make quite clear that Israel will not relinquish territory that's strategically important for her, and important for other reasons, but strategically important for her. And I'm not sure that time now is working in our favor. There are a number of factors that could make it far more difficult to do this and bring much greater pressure. If Trump wins the next elections, he's going to need the evangelical Christians far less than he needs them now. The evangelical Christians are strong advocates for annexation, at least a large portion of it. So I think that's a card that may be lost after the elections. I don't even really want to think about what will happen if Trump loses the elections and the Democrats take over, because then I think the question of what's urgent about it will become moot, because there will be enormous pressure from the radical left wing of the Democratic Party for Israel to make concessions, and the country will be under immense pressure, I think, to make security sacrifices. So I don't think we should just sit on our laurels. They're saying things are fine now, so what's the problem? That's true, but it reminds me of the guy who jumped off a building from the 30th story, and when he got to the 20th story, he said, everything's fine now.
So far, so good,
The view's great, and there's a fresh breeze.
Right.
So I really think that this has been in limbo for so long, and now you have an historic opportunity to do something. Another thing is, which I find a little puzzling, is the opposition from right-wing sources. Because it is true that the Trump administration mentions that there should be a Palestinian several years down the line if they comply with a number of stringent conditions. But I don't think there is really a snowball's chance of hell of the Palestinians complying with those conditions, which include disarming the Hamas and stopping incitement. Basically the Palestinians would have to stop being Palestinians to comply with that. So I think we should annex now, make our position stronger, and wait for opportunities in the future, rather than fritter away opportunities in the present.
Okay, so you're saying that, number one, Corona, because we're in a pandemic, it would have been a good time to be able to do it, because that's taking over a lot of the news stories, and so it would be easier to pass that through. And also, and also, if the Democrats win in the November elections in the United States, they're not going to have a friend in the White House. They'll have another Obama or worse in the White House as it applies to Israel. So, knowing all of this, why do you believe that the Prime Minister is not pushing this through?
Well, let me say two things. There's another reason for it to be pushed through, because the Trump administration has done a lot for Israel, whether it's recognizing Jerusalem as the capital, moving the embassy there, defunding UNRWA, defunding the PA, pulling out of the Iran deal, putting sanctions on Iran, recognizing sovereignty in the Golan. And so, I'm a bit anxious that they might say, well, we've done so much for you, why are you nitpicking with us now? And that's why I think that the opposition from the right wing is very short-sighted and myopic. But when you say why isn't it doing it now, well, it's very difficult for me to speculate, because I haven't really been able to decipher the logical code that's driven Israeli policy with the Palestinians for the last 3 decades. So I found Israel's behavior over the last 3 decades completely inexplicable anyway. But I suppose that Netanyahu feels pressure from, that the Democrats will be alienated, that the EU will be angry. Although I think all of these are fears that shouldn't really deter him. As far as the EU goes, I think it's been very shrewd Israeli policy to drive a wedge into the EU by developing good relations with the Visegrad countries in Eastern and Central Europe, who will not vote for sanctions against Israel, and without a unanimous decision, they can't impose sanctions, at least for the moment. Or there are talks of trying to move that to a qualified majority, but at the moment, they still need a unanimous decision for sanctions, and there's no chance that they'll get it now with the countries in Europe.
But the Prime Minister knew that Europe was going to raise its voice against this, and he knows that the Democrats are not for Israel. Whatever we do, they're not going to be for us. So the only other conclusion that I can come to, or at least thinking off the cuff right here, is that perhaps he's more left wing than we want to give him credit for. I mean, we see that as soon as he got elected, who did he take in? He bumped out the Yamina party with Naftali Bennett and went into bed with Benny Gantz, which is the blue and white left. I mean, everything that he's doing is left-wing policy, it seems. He's promising the right wing, but he implements left.
Well, I wouldn't say implements left, but he certainly doesn't implement a hardline right-wing policy. But it's true. As I say, I do find this reticence puzzling and perturbing because I don't think it's going to be on the table for forever. Netanyahu's big advantage has always been the alternative, and even today, with all this resentment building up against him, he's still by far the candidate that the public sees as the most suitable to lead the country. I think that that in many ways he thinks that he has to present a more moderate face to the world. I think that's a big mistake. And one of the reasons that I think that Israel hasn't beefed up its public diplomacy, as I've said before many times, that Israel has been very, very lax and very derelict in presenting its case to the world, because there's really nothing more perverse and paradoxical than someone who professes to be a liberal to support the establishment of a Palestinian state, which is the major reason for opposing annexation. Because if you don't support a two-state solution, then there's no reason to support a Palestinian state. There's no reason for to oppose annexation. And everybody knows, I think even the most fervent two-stater knows, that a Palestinian state will be the diametric antithesis of all the values that liberals are supposed to hold dear. I don't think any two-stater believes that it won't be a giant Gaza, a homophobic, misogynistic Muslim majority on the fringes of Greater Tel Aviv, which will be a constant source of destabilization and violence, and by the way, it's a source of great concern for Jordan. So, I think there are many reasons. I think annexing the Jordan Basin would probably be the best thing for the stability of the Hashemite regime there. Anyone saying, this will destabilize Hashemites. I don't think anything will stabilize it more than the fact that it knows that it's been distanced from any possible irredentist movements from in Judea and Samaria.
All right. Well, we're going to have to hold it there. Very interesting. We'll have to chew over this. Dr. Martin Sherman, thank you again for coming on the show with us. I really appreciate you giving us your time.
Thank you for the invitation.
All right, and everybody, again, you can check him out at martinsherman.org or at strategic-israel.org. When we get back, a new show is joining IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. Where's my coffee? It will be a live show where you can call in. It's all about moving to Israel and more. We're going to be speaking with that new show host right after the break. We'll be right back.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
We live in the age of information, but not inspiration. If you're like me, you're looking to be inspired to reach higher, to connect more, and to grow. Well, if you want to get warm, you need to stand close to the fire. And if you want to catch fire, you need to stand close enough to get hit by the sparks. Join me, Penina Taylor, as we walk with people who have embarked on a spiritual journey towards Torah. We'll uncover what started them on their journey and what truths they discovered along the way. So prepare to be inspired as we take a leap of faith every Sunday at 5 p.m. on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, we're back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, and we're going to be introducing to you all now a new show host on Israel News Talk Radio who is going to be having a live weekly show every Monday at 4 p.m. Israel time, 9 a.m. U.S. Eastern time. It is a show where you can call in with your comments, questions, and join him on the air. Our guest is Josh Wander, our new show host. He is the founder of the Bring Them Home organization at bringthemhome.org.il, or you can find him on Facebook and YouTube, Bring Them Home Aliyah Now. You can find them there as well. And welcome to the show, Josh Wander.
Thank you, Tamar. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm very excited. You know, as we see, there's a huge interest now, all of a sudden an upsurge in interest of making Aliyah to Israel due to what's going on in the United States and with the political situation there, as well as the coronavirus. And there's an expected number of up to 90,000 Americans who may be making Aliyah or moving to Israel within the next year. And so I said, we've got to get some shows on the air here that are going to address that, and so you're one of those shows. The name of your show is
Israel Unplugged.
Okay, and why did you name it that?
Because even though it's somewhat of a sensitive subject for many people, when you talk about Aliyah, I remember being at a shul, at a synagogue not so long ago, and they asked me to speak, and the rabbi called me over right before and said to me, you could speak about Israel, you could speak about any subject you want, but just don't mention Aliyah, because that's taboo over here. We don't mention that. So for some people, that's a sensitive subject, and we plan on getting into the meat and potatoes. We plan on being a little bit controversial with our show.
All right. Well, everybody likes controversy if they're listening to radio. It's very exciting. All right. So what do you have planned for us? What should we expect from a show like yours?
Well, first of all, we're going to be discussing the philosophy behind Jews coming back home. And that includes the sources, everything from the Rambam, Maimonides, to Rabbi Kook, and to discuss where this begins. Because I think that the source of the problem, if you want to call it one, that Jews are not coming home is that they don't understand the fundamentals of why they should come home. So we're going to be discussing that why, and once we get into the exact reasons why, we can discuss the reasons why not. We can say what are the oppositions to that. We could perhaps have guests on that will oppose our positions, and perhaps in a debate format, we can discuss why one should or should not. But there's a lot of fun going to be on this show. I'm really looking forward to it. All
right. And so, there's a lot of religious Jews. I mean, I've had some, I won't say run-ins because we're friendly, but some disagreements, where I'll quote a rabbi and their books or their commentaries on why a Jew should be living in Israel and not be in the exile, which was a curse, by the way. But a lot of them, they just come back with the answer: until the Messiah comes, the Messiah will bring us, and we're not coming because every place is the exile today until we have the Holy Temple. So what would you say to that if they came to you with an answer like that?
Well, that's part of the show. Part of the show is going to discuss not only the sources and not only the concepts of halachically, from a Jewish law perspective, why one should make Aliyah, but also to discuss the amazing era that we're living in. We're living in Messianic times. And what does it mean to be living in Messianic times? What does it mean to be part of the redemptive process? Once one understands that we're not just living in the context that Jews were living in perhaps 200 years ago in ghettos in Europe, it changes the whole way the whole perspective one has on Aliyah and why one should make it and make it now.
Okay. All right. So I'm looking forward to some debates. If you can have some debates on the show, I'm going to be really especially sharing that show because I think that it is a big debate. There are some people that we saw throughout history were in denial. I mean, look at all the Jews that were in Europe during the times of Hitler that could have gotten out. Not all of them could, by the way, but earlier on, some of them could have gotten out much easier, and they decided to stay for whatever reasons that they had. People can always rationalize to themselves why they should be making the decision that they're making. So knowing that, what do you have up your sleeve?
Well, it's interesting that you should mention that, Tamar, because I was speaking to my friend Winky, Yisrael Meidad, today, and we were discussing that Jabotinsky, who was one of the four founders of the Zionist movement, actually tried to warn European Jewry of the impending disaster that was going to befall them and that they should immediately evacuate from Europe. And unfortunately, his words were not heeded. And in some ways, many of us feel today that we're in that same position where we feel that there is perhaps a danger to the Jews that are in exile still, and that it's necessary for us to warn them and to encourage them to come home quickly before something bad happens. We know, as you mentioned on the way into this show, we know that there's crazy stuff going on, whether it be Corona, whether it be the financial instability, whether it be anti-Semitism, whether it be financial, all sorts of things that are happening. People are shaking. People are shaken, and perhaps for the first time in history of our generation, Jews that grew up comfortably in the West, in America, in England, those Jews are starting to feel like perhaps we should find an alternative to what they called the Golden Medina, this place that was always looked at as being the perfect exile. I always say that the worst exile is the one that you don't realize you're in. And for many Jews, that's exactly the case. Until recently, they didn't realize they were in exile. But God has his ways of changing things and making people think. And that's exactly what he's doing. He's shaking the world in a way that it hasn't been done in our lifetimes or perhaps in generations. That Jews, for the first time, are feeling uncomfortable, even in the most comfortable places. I'm reminded of a book, the title of a book by Rabbi Meir Kahana. It's called Uncomfortable Questions for Comfortable Jews. Mm-hmm. And really, I think that you know what, if I had to make another title for my podcast, I think that would be it. Uncomfortable Questions for Comfortable Jews.
Right. All right. I want to say a couple of things here, and that is that you were talking about Jabotinsky and how his words were not heeded, but I'm going to add to that, Josh, and say that many times his words were not just not heeded, but they were not heard because people didn't want to invite them to speak even. They didn't want the synagogues that he wanted to go and speak at. They didn't want to hear his message for whatever reasons, and I think that the same thing is happening today. You just said that you went to the synagogue to speak, and the rabbi comes and tells you, talk about Israel, talk whatever you want, but don't talk about Aliyah. Why?
Well, first of all, that's where your incredible shows come in, because I think that perhaps for the first time in history, God has implanted this technology in the world where an individual like myself could be speaking from the comfort of their own home or from a studio, and they could be reaching the masses out there. Jabotinsky didn't have that opportunity. No one in previous generations had the opportunity of doing that. They weren't in a CNN generation where you can just start speaking on the internet and reach thousands, if not millions of people around the globe. So we have a specific technology today that allows us to do that. And as always, we're supposed to take advantage of the different technologies that God gives us in order to try to bring the world closer to that final redemptive process. Why your question is why aren't they listening? That is a question which I'm sure we're going to delve into more on the Israel Unplugged show. But it's deep and it's lengthy. There's a lot to discuss there because there's a lot of psychology. The simple answer is that people are as we said, are very comfortable. And when people are comfortable, it's really hard to get them to think outside of the box. But again, I think that the times are changing. People are starting to think outside of the box. And this is an opportunity, maybe a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to wake them up and get them get them home, get them back to where they belong.
Right. I see some high-profile Jews. I'll just give a name. I was watching the Mark Levin, who I'm with the name like Levin, right, from the tribe of Levi, right, or Levi in English. He's a Jewish man, American, a proud American. and so proud and so happy to be American. And he's got pictures in his studio where he broadcasts from of Abraham Lincoln and the American flag. And he's a big patriot, as most all Jews are patriots of their own countries. They love the countries that they're comfortable in, and they're big patriots. But perhaps they've lost sight of who they really are. I mean, they're not Americans that are Jews. They're Jews that are living in America. And now there's a lot of Americans who don't want the Jews living there. And we've seen throughout history, whenever there's a pandemic, who's blamed? The Jews ultimately are. Whenever there's a financial crisis in a country, who's inevitably blamed? It's the Jews. And that's what we're seeing happening now in the United States and all over the world. In fact, because of the pandemic, the financial standards of people have fallen or are precarious. They've lost their businesses. And I doubt that someone like Mark Levin is thinking, well, maybe it's time, in history that the Jewish people should get up and move home to Israel. What would you say to people that are just so embedded in their host countries that they don't even think about Israel?
I would say two things. First of all, I believe that there is a filtration process going on today where God, I've gotten this over many years of being with a Rabbi Nachman Kahana here in the old city of Jerusalem. God is choosing who is going to be on his team in the end of days. Those that he wants to be on his team are going to make it back to the land of Israel. And those that he doesn't want to be on his team are going to disappear into the exile. And we see this has happened historically.
Josh,
yes,
we've come to the end of the show, unfortunately. And I have to stop you there.
More to come in our show.
That's right. All right. So you're going to be on the air with us tomorrow at 4 p.m. Israel time. We're talking Monday, 4 p.m. Israel time, 9 a.m. U.S. Eastern time. It is a live show. You can call in. You're going to hear Josh's story, why he made Aliyah, and more on that show. I'm very excited. Thank you for being with us, Josh Wander.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Israel Unplugged, everyone. That's the name of the show. Thanks for being with us.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at israelnewstalkradio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India, and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom! Okay, wait a minute. Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling from the rolling hills of Ma'ale Adumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Ma'ale Adumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.